Rome had faced countless enemies, but none like this. At Syracuse, the legions met not just stone walls, but a mind that turned geometry into weapons. From the cliffs above the sea, giant arms of timber reached down to seize Roman ships, lifting them like toys before smashing them into the waves. Catapults rained projectiles with uncanny precision, each strike a message from a man the world would never forget, Archimedes. In this story, war is not muscle but imagination, and it changed everything. But before we start, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Rome had crushed kingdoms, broken alliances, and marched over landscapes that once believed themselves untouchable. Yet on the island of Sicily, in the city of Syracuse, they confronted something different. A fortress not built merely of stone, but of thought. What awaited them was not a simple wall to breach, nor a weak ruler to overthrow, but an intelligence that would rewrite the very rules of war. That intelligence carried a name whispered in awe, Archimedes. The city itself was a jewel of the Mediterranean, resting upon limestone cliffs and harbors that drew merchants from Egypt, Greece, and Iberia. Syracuse's heart was Ortygia, an ancient citadel where temples and palaces overlooked the restless sea. The streets of Neapolis bustled with artisans, mathematicians, and traders, all living under the shadow of war. Every stone seemed heavy with memory, for Syracuse had endured centuries of conquest and intrigue, yet never before faced the weight of Rome's fury. At the head of the Roman assault stood Marcus Claudius Marcellus, scarred from earlier campaigns and seasoned by decades of combat. At 53, his face bore the lines of endless marches, but his will remained iron. Rome called him the Sword of the Republic, and he carried that title with relentless purpose. His legions, nearly 40,000 strong, assembled siege towers and warships, their confidence shaped by victories across Italy. Yet here, standing against them, was not a reckless youth or a fading monarch. It was an old man with numbers carved into his soul. Archimedes, in his 70s, was not a warrior, nor did he wear the trappings of command. His body stooped, his robe often stained with ash or ink. He seemed more philosopher than defender. But within his eyes burned a quiet storm. He had studied the stars, measured the earth, and bent circles into truths unseen by others. To him, the city's walls were not obstacles, but instruments waiting to be tuned. Where others saw stone, he saw levers. Where others saw rope, he saw geometry, coiled in silence. The people of Syracuse knew him not as a distant sage, but as a guardian whose mind worked ceaselessly for their survival. When merchants spoke in the Agora, they spoke also of his machines, cranes hidden within the battlements, catapults adjusted with uncanny precision, and whispered rumors of mirrors that could set ships aflame. These stories spread like wildfire, half legend and half faith, binding the city together. For in Archimedes they believed, and through his designs they found hope against the inevitability of Rome. What Rome had not anticipated was that imagination could hold ground as firmly as steel. Marcellus prepared his men for another conquest, but each step toward Syracuse would reveal a truth he had never confronted. Strategy carved in wood, iron, and intellect could make legions hesitate. The battle that was about to unfold would not only decide the fate of a city, but echo across centuries, reminding all who listened that even empires stumble when they underestimate the mind of a single man. The world beyond Syracuse was aflame. The Second Punic War raged across the Mediterranean, pulling nations into a struggle that consumed everything in its path. Rome fought not only for dominance, but for survival, for Hannibal of Carthage had shattered legions in Italy and threatened the very gates of the Republic. Amid this chaos, Syracuse became more than a city. It became a pawn whose allegiance could tip the balance of empires. For over 50 years, Syracuse had stood as Rome's ally, guided by King Hieron II, a ruler of caution and rare longevity. His reign brought stability to Sicily, his wisdom balancing the ambitions of stronger powers. But in 215 BC, the old king died at nearly 90, leaving the throne to his grandson Hieronymus. Barely 15 years old, untested and easily swayed, the boy king abandoned the careful path of his grandfather. He turned his eyes toward Carthage, sealing Syracuse's doom. Rome could not ignore such betrayal. To them, Hieronymus's shift of loyalty was more than youthful folly. It was treason in the midst of Rome's bloodiest war. Marcellus and his commanders saw the city's defection as a dagger pointed at their flank. With Carthage gaining footholds across Sicily, Syracuse's harbors threatened to open to enemy fleets, and the island's wealth could fuel Hannibal's campaigns. For Rome, hesitation meant weakness, and weakness meant death. Inside Syracuse, fear mingled with pride. Some citizens clung to their late king's alliance with Rome, while others celebrated Hieronymus's defiance. Markets buzzed with rumors. Carthaginian gold promised security, Roman anger promised destruction. In the streets of Acradina and the temples of Ortygia, voices clashed over loyalty and survival. What united them, however, was the certainty that war was coming, and when it came, it would be unlike anything Sicily had ever endured. It was in this moment of peril that Archimedes' role became unavoidable. No longer a scholar hidden in scrolls, he was summoned as the city's shield. His machines were not luxuries, but necessities born of desperation. Towers bristled with concealed engines, docks hid strange wooden frames, and the workshops of Neapolis worked day and night under his guidance. In every pulley, every counterweight, every iron claw, Syracuse placed its fragile hope. Rome's eyes turned south, and Marcellus's legions began their march toward the city. Siege towers rumbled across the earth, warships cut through the Ionian waters, and banners of the Republic darkened the horizon. Syracuse, once a jewel gleaming in the Mediterranean sun, was about to face the storm of history. And for those watching tonight, remain until the end, for what unfolds here is a story of brilliance and betrayal, of power and silence, and of how even empires can be broken by the hand of one man. The Roman advance into Sicily was not swift, but deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. Marcellus understood that Syracuse could not be taken with recklessness. The city was strong, its harbors deep, its walls thick. He encamped his legions along the Epipolae Plateau, a ridge overlooking the inland approaches, while his fleet pressed against the shoreline. To the soldiers it seemed routine, but Marcellus whispered to his captains that this siege would demand more than brute strength. Syracuse was no ordinary city. It was a fortress spread across districts, each with its own defenses. Ortygia, the ancient heart, held the royal palace and sacred temples. Acradina, sprawling and wealthy, housed markets, arsenals, and the city's greatest treasures. Neapolis, crowded with workshops and artisans, became the forge of resistance. On the heights of Epipolae itself stood defensive walls that had defied conquerors before. To breach these layers meant bleeding Rome, one street at a time. Marcellus studied the geography with cold patience. His eyes traced the limestone cliffs where ships could not land, the narrow gates where cavalry would falter, and the hidden quays where enemy reinforcements might arrive. He ordered trenches dug and towers raised, knowing that hunger and fear could break a city as surely as swords. Yet behind those walls a presence he could not see prepared to meet him with devices Rome had never known. Within Syracuse, Archimedes walked the battlements in silence. To the guards, he seemed like an old man lost in thought, but every glance measured angles, every step calculated distance. He spoke quietly to artisans and soldiers, instructing them to adjust ropes, to strengthen beams, to test the tension of torsion springs. When a captain asked whether the machines would hold, Archimedes replied without raising his voice, "They will not only hold, they will strike before they are seen." The people watched with unease as wooden arms stretched from the walls, as hidden engines groaned with the weight of counterweights. Children whispered about giants guarding the city, merchants prayed to Athena for wisdom, and even seasoned soldiers crossed themselves when passing near the workshops. In Archimedes' designs, they saw something beyond mortal craft, as if the gods themselves had lent their secrets. Yet for Archimedes, it was not divine favor, but mathematics turned into survival. The stage was set, Rome outside with its iron discipline, Syracuse within with its restless machines. Marcellus believed time was on his side, but time itself had been armed by Archimedes. What followed would not be a clash of swords alone, but of will against ingenuity, empire against intellect. And for those listening now, consider subscribing, for this is only the beginning of a story where every turn sharpens into revelation and every detail drags us deeper into the shadows of history. Archimedes had long ceased to be only a scholar of numbers. Age had bowed his frame, yet sharpened his mind into a blade finer than any Roman steel. In his 70s he spoke little, his voice often lost among the hammering of carpenters and the clatter of rope. To those who served him, he was not a philosopher but a sentinel, his eyes tracing invisible lines across sky and sea where dangers moved unseen. His life had always been bound to Syracuse. In youth, he studied in Alexandria, where scrolls and scholars fed his hunger for truth. He returned to Ortygia with ideas that few could grasp. Water that could be lifted by screws, levers that could move ships, mathematics that could tame chaos. Higher on, the Secu, the city's cautious king, had once leaned upon him for advice, calling him not merely wise but indispensable. Now that wisdom was tested in war. On the city's walls, Archimedes oversaw the transformation of stone into living engines. Catapults calibrated for different ranges bristled under his direction, able to strike ships before they reached the shore or pierce soldiers assembling ladders. Wooden cranes leaned outward, tipped with iron claws that lurked in shadow. Archimedes instructed his artisans with patience, reminding them that precision was survival. When asked if these contraptions would terrify Rome, he murmured that terror was not the aim, but necessity. To the citizens, however, he became something more. Whispers spread in the markets that Archimedes conversed with gods, that he measured thunder and commanded lightning. Mothers told their children that his hands drew circles the heavens obeyed. Even seasoned generals spoke of him with unease, half believing his devices to be enchanted. Yet Archimedes dismissed such reverence. He told a soldier who asked if the machines were divine, "The gods grant nothing. These are truths men refuse to see." Behind his stern resolve lingered humanity. Those close to him remembered how he lingered by the harbor, gazing at the sea with quiet melancholy. He disliked bloodshed, but understood its inevitability. Each invention was a paradox, a triumph of thought forged into a weapon of death. His loyalty to Syracuse demanded silence of conscience. In this, Archimedes embodied the cruelty of necessity, where brilliance becomes a tool of survival, and survival leaves no room for mercy. Rome did not yet know the full measure of what awaited them, but Marcellus soon would. As the sun rose over Epipolae and the Roman camp prepared its siege engines, Archimedes' machines waited like predators hidden in the walls. What unfolded would shatter the illusion of Roman invincibility and carve Syracuse into legend. And if you value these hidden stories, leave a like so that history's shadows may reach more eyes and voices long silent may be heard again. Marcus Claudius Marcellus had earned his title as the Sword of Rome long before he reached the walls of Syracuse. He was not a man of hesitation. Scarred from campaigns in Gaul, tempered by decades of war, he embodied the relentlessness of the Republic. At 53, his shoulders bore the weight of empire, and he resolved that Syracuse would fall, no matter how long or how costly the struggle became. From his camp on the Epipolae Plateau, Marcellus surveyed the city's formidable defenses. He watched as his engineers raised siege towers, as warships bristled with grappling hooks, as legions prepared ladders and rams. To his men he promised inevitable victory. To his captains he spoke more quietly. Syracuse was not to be underestimated. He warned them that a clever mind hidden within those walls was far more dangerous than stone or steel. Inside Syracuse, the commanders divided responsibility for defense. Apollodorus of Perge, an engineer of renown, coordinated directly with Archimedes to maintain the machines. Philodemus of Ortygia, a soldier hardened by years of mercenary campaigns, commanded the infantry stationed at the gates. Their temperaments clashed, Apollodorus patient and calculating, Philodemus fiery and unyielding, but both bent their efforts toward one aim: resisting Rome. In the council chambers, disputes dissolved when Archimedes spoke with quiet certainty. The people too carried their share of the struggle. Merchants offered coin to fortify the walls. Fishermen adapted their nets to carry supplies across hidden inlets. Women filled the workshops of Neapolis, weaving ropes, carrying timber, and tending to the wounded. Syracuse was not divided between elite and commoner, for Rome threatened them all equally. And in this unity, the city drew strength, even as dread coiled like smoke in every street and prayer. Marcellus pressed his men harder. He walked among the legions, speaking to them not as commander but as comrade. He reminded them of their duty, of Rome's unbroken legacy, of the shame that would fall upon them should Syracuse stand unbent. Yet at night, alone with his closest tribunes, he admitted unease. This was no ordinary siege. He told them, "We are not only fighting men, we are fighting something unseen, and unseen foes are the most dangerous." As dawn painted the Ionian waters in red and gold, the opposing wills sharpened. Rome carried discipline, Syracuse carried invention, and the two would collide with violence. In this crucible, Marcellus sought glory while Archimedes sought survival, and between them an empire's fate trembled. Stay with us and share this story forward, so that the lessons carved in stone and blood may not be forgotten when history repeats its most merciless truths. The first Roman assault began at dawn, drums rolling like thunder across the sea. Quinqueremes advanced in formation, their oars cutting the water with mechanical precision. Siege towers loomed on their decks, prepared to disgorge soldiers onto the walls of Syracuse. Marcellus watched from the shore, his jaw tight, certain that overwhelming force would break the city. But within the battlements, Archimedes had prepared something Rome had never faced before. From the cliffs, stones hurled by massive catapults crashed into the advancing ships. They struck with such force that timbers splintered, iron shattered, and men vanished beneath the waves. At greater range, Archimedes used engines calibrated for distance, while at close quarters, hidden machines unleashed smaller projectiles. The precision was uncanny, each strike calculated as if the old mathematician himself drew invisible circles around the Roman fleet. Soldiers whispered in fear. calling it sorcery born from numbers. Then the claws revealed themselves. Great wooden arms reached over the walls, tipped with iron grapples. With groaning ropes and counterweights, they seized the prows of ships and dragged them upward. Roman vessels, heavy with men and weapons, swung helplessly before crashing against the cliffs. Survivors cried out as the sea swallowed their comrades. Marcellus's officers stared in disbelief, watching legions humiliated not by gods but by an old man's inventions. The terror spread quickly. Soldiers refused to approach the walls, convinced death awaited in forms they could not comprehend. Captains argued among themselves, urging retreat or hesitation. Marcellus, furious, shouted to them that fear was more dangerous than any weapon. Yet even he could not deny what his eyes beheld. He told a centurion near him, "This is no city. It is a machine, and its master is more ruthless than steel." Within Syracuse, the people roared with sudden confidence. From the markets of Acradina to the temples of Ortygia, they cheered as ships burned and soldiers drowned. For the first time, they believed Rome could be resisted, that the invincible legions were mortal. Archimedes did not join their triumph. He remained at the walls, instructing quietly, reminding his men to reset ropes, to measure distances, to prepare for the next strike. His eyes betrayed no joy, only inevitability. The sea became Rome's graveyard, but the war was far from over. Marcellus withdrew his fleet in anger, determined to find another way, while Syracuse exhaled in relief. Yet victory built upon terror is fragile, and even genius cannot hold forever against persistence. Before the story twists further, take a moment to comment what you would have felt watching ships torn from the sea. Would you stand in awe, or would fear drive you from the walls? Marcellus was not a man easily broken. Though the first assault had ended in humiliation, he refused to yield. He gathered his tribunes beneath the fading light and spoke with grim candor. "Rome has been bloodied, but Rome is not defeated," he declared. His words carried the weight of command, but his eyes betrayed calculation. He knew brute force alone could not overcome Archimedes. Strategy would now become his sharpest weapon. Patience replaced fury. Marcellus ordered his fleet to withdraw from direct assault, anchoring them at a distance beyond the reach of the catapults. His legions shifted focus to the land, constructing trenches and earthworks to choke the city. By night, he sent scouts into the countryside, cutting off food and water. The siege was no longer about immediate conquest. It was about erosion, turning Syracuse's strength into slow, suffocating weakness. Inside the city, the mood shifted again. The people rejoiced at the earlier victories, but as days stretched into weeks, hunger gnawed at their confidence. Supplies dwindled, and Carthaginian reinforcements remained distant. Whispers rose in the streets, questioning how long Archimedes' machines could defend them if their stomachs betrayed them first. Yet the old man remained calm, instructing soldiers to maintain vigilance. He told them, "Rome is patient, but patience can also be broken." Marcellus understood the power of waiting, but he also sought cracks in the city's armor. He dispatched spies disguised as traders, hoping to bribe guards or learn of weaknesses in the walls. Some were caught and executed, their confessions echoing through the streets as warnings. Still, fragments of intelligence reached him: gates poorly manned at night, towers less guarded during festivals. He collected these details like blades, waiting for the right moment to strike. The Roman general confided to one of his centurions that Syracuse was unlike any foe he had faced. In Gaul, he said, courage broke their lines. Here, courage dies on the walls, but hunger will betray them. His words revealed the truth. The machines of Archimedes could halt Rome's advance, but they could not feed the people forever. Marcellus was resolved to make time itself his ally, grinding down resistance until even genius surrendered. The balance of power now shifted, no longer in the clash of iron, but in the silence of waiting. Archimedes had turned stone into weapons, but Marcellus had turned days into blades. Their duel unfolded not on the battlefield alone, but in the invisible war of endurance. As this struggle deepens, consider subscribing if you have not already, for the coming twists will reveal how brilliance and brutality collided and how history remembers only one victor. The breaking of Syracuse came not through force of arms, but through the crack in human vigilance. During the festival of Artemis, when citizens filled the temples with offerings and torches glowed against the night, Roman scouts seized their chance. Guided by silence, they climbed neglected battlements and opened a hidden gate. By dawn, Marcellus's legions poured into the city, the roar of conquest drowning the hymns of prayer. The streets turned to chaos. Acradina's markets, once alive with voices of trade, now rang with the clash of steel and the cries of the wounded. Soldiers tore through alleys, torches set homes aflame, and the people who had trusted the machines of Archimedes found themselves powerless against Roman blades. Ortygia, the sacred citadel, became a furnace of smoke, its temples stripped of offerings, its palaces seized as trophies of empire. Archimedes remained at his home near the Neapolis quarter, seated before a sand table where circles and equations sprawled like constellations. He had been warned of Rome's breach, yet he would not flee. A soldier stormed inside, demanding his surrender. Archimedes, still intent upon his diagrams, whispered without fear, "Do not disturb my circles." The plea carried no defiance, only the dignity of a man bound to truth until his final breath. The soldier ignored Marcellus's explicit command to spare him. In a moment of impatience, he struck the old man down. Thus ended the life of Archimedes, not upon a battlefield, but in quiet study, cut short by ignorance. When news reached Marcellus, he lamented bitterly. He told his officers, "Rome has lost more in his death than it has gained in this conquest." His grief revealed that victory often comes chained to regret. The sack of Syracuse continued for days. Statues were looted, manuscripts stolen, treasures carried across the sea. Yet among all the spoils, none shone brighter than the legacy of Archimedes. Roman engineers studied fragments of his devices, attempting to learn what had so confounded them. Still, the man who had breathed life into those machines was gone, and the city that trusted in his genius lay broken. Survival had yielded to inevitability. The silence that followed was heavier than battle. Syracuse's walls still stood, but they no longer belonged to its people. Rome carved its will into the stone, but Archimedes carved his into memory. His machines would rust, yet his ideas endured, whispered across centuries as warnings to empires. Before we close on this final reflection, I ask you to share this story with someone who believes power is eternal, for history shows that even empires can stumble. Rome emerged victorious, yet the taste of triumph was bitter. Syracuse, once the jewel of Sicily, was reduced to ashes and silence. The legions marched through streets, stripped of their identity, carrying treasures that would adorn Rome but never replace what had been lost. Marcellus himself walked among the ruins, his face a mask of stone. He knew that though the Republic had claimed the city, it had extinguished a light that could never be reignited. Archimedes' death haunted the conqueror. To his tribunes, Marcellus confessed, "I wish to bring him to Rome alive, to honor his genius. Instead, Rome's impatience has robbed us of a prize greater than gold. His lament was not for sentiment alone. He understood that empires feed on knowledge as much as conquest, and in killing the old man, Rome had slain the very mind that humbled it. Yet ideas do not perish with flesh. The machines that defended Syracuse inspired Roman engineers who copied designs for siege and defense. Stories of the claw and catapult spread among soldiers like campfire legends. Generals debated whether Archimedes' mirrors had truly scorched ships or whether fear magnified the tale. Whatever the truth, his name became a spectre, a reminder that intellect can wound more deeply than iron. The people of Syracuse bore the deepest scars, families displaced, temples plundered, and manuscripts scattered across seas left wounds not measured in blood but in silence. Those who survived carried stories of the old man drawing circles, of ships ripped from the water, of Rome shaken before reclaiming its pride. Syracuse, though conquered, refused to vanish. Through memory, it defied the empire that consumed it. In Rome, Archimedes' name lived in whispers, passed among scholars who studied fragments of his work. Centuries later, his discoveries would inspire minds across continents, his theorems guiding inventions he never dreamed of. Empires rose and fell, yet the truths he carved from geometry endured. The fall of Syracuse proved that cities crumble, but knowledge cannot be chained. His legacy stretched further than any empire's borders. And so the tale closes, not with the roar of conquest, but with the quiet endurance of thought. Archimedes died, yet he outlived the generals who sought his city. His machines rusted, yet his ideas marched into eternity. Remember this: walls fall, empires fade, but the mind shapes history long after swords turn to dust. If this story moved you, subscribe and let these forgotten echoes continue to find their place in the present.